You board in Sydney at 8 a.m. 3 hours later, you're in Melbourne. No airports, no security checks, just a blur of Outback flying past your window at 350 kilometers per hour. Back in 1989, this wasn't sci-fi, it was real. Australia's very fast train was fully planned, privately funded, and ready to launch. A bullet train that would have outrun anything outside Japan or France. 30 departures a day, 0 emissions, cross-country travel reimagined. The cost? Just $6.5 billion, a fraction of today's bloated $114 billion price tag. But instead of making history, Australia pulled the plug. No tracks, no trains, no progress. Why did a country with the perfect landscape for high-speed rail choose to fall behind, while Europe, Japan, and even China sped ahead? Who killed Australia's future? This story doesn't start with a prime minister or a big company, it starts with a scientist. In 1984, Dr. Paul Wild, the head of CSIRO and a train lover for life, stepped onto a new express train going from Canberra to Sydney. It was called the XPT, and many said it was Australia's big leap into high-speed rail. But was it really? Not even close. The train was slow, bumpy, and late. It took almost 5 hours to reach Sydney. Dr. Wild was not impressed. If this was Australia's best, then we had a lot of catching up to do. So what did he do? He went back to Canberra with a big idea. What if we had real high-speed rail, like in France or Japan? What if we could connect Sydney and Melbourne through Canberra and cut the trip down to just 3 hours? Wild wasn't dreaming small. He said the train should travel at least 350 kilometers per hour. That's faster than France's TGV at the time. In fact, faster than any train in the Southern Hemisphere. But when he shared the idea with the government, they pushed back. Too expensive, they said. Not possible, they said. So what do you do when no one believes in your big idea? Wild decided to take the idea into his own hands. He turned to the private sector. And within just 2 years, he had formed a powerful group, Elders IXL, TNT, Kumagai Gumi, and later BHP. They called themselves the Very Fast Train Joint Venture, and they were going to do it all without any government money. In 1987, they kicked off the studies. Consultants came in, market forecasts were drawn, demand was clear. Millions of Australians were flying between Sydney and Melbourne every year. A high-speed rail could capture a huge slice of that traffic. In fact, by 1990, even the Prime Minister called it the most important development project since World War II. The dream looked real, groundbreaking seemed close. So where did it all go wrong? The plan was ambitious. The Very Fast Train, VFT, would stretch across 854 kilometers, starting from Sydney, passing through Canberra, and ending in Melbourne. Sounds like a straight shot, right? Not quite. The land wasn't easy. Hills, valleys, and rocky ground made it a tough job. Even though they chose an inland route, one that skipped the coast to protect the environment and saved 108 kilometers compared to the old railway, it was still a huge engineering challenge. But how fast is very fast? These trains were designed to run at 350 kilometers per hour. That's super quick. And instead of using new, risky tech like magnetic levitation, they went with something more trusted, steel wheels on rails. This made the system easier to build and safer to run. The trains would be sleek and shaped to move smoothly through the air, with electric power coming from wires above the tracks. And these weren't just a few trains each day. The plan called for 30 trains in both directions, every single day. That's a lot of trains. Some would run non-stop from Sydney to Canberra in just 1 hour. Others would keep going to Melbourne, making the full trip in just 3 hours. That's a huge difference. Right now, that same train ride takes almost 11 hours. But this project wasn't just about getting from Sydney to Melbourne fast. It was about much more. What about the towns and cities in between? The VFT planned to stop at places like Campbelltown, Bowral, Goulburn, Yass, Wagga Wagga, Albury-Wodonga, Benalla, Seymour, and even both Sydney and Melbourne airports. These regional centres weren't afterthoughts. They were key parts of the vision. They pull in commuters, tourists, and help ease population pressure from the major cities. So when was construction supposed to begin? The plan was to break ground in 1992 and finish in just 5 years. The price tag? Around $6.56 billion in 1990 dollars, more than $11 billion today. That number included everything: buying land, preparing the route, laying track, setting up power and control systems, rolling stock, and communications. Want to break that down? More than half the cost was for the route and facilities alone, with rolling stock making up about 14%. When you compare that to later government estimates that shot past $100 billion, the original numbers almost seem small. But here's the twist. While the VFT was fully private, the consortium behind it wasn't asking for taxpayer money. What they did ask for were just two things: faster land deals and a fair tax setup. But why was land such a big deal? Because the train needed a clean, straight path that stretched across farms, towns, flood zones, and even places where homes might be built in the future. That meant hundreds of kilometers of deals and planning. Without solid government help, delays and rising costs were a real threat. And then there was tax. The group didn't want tax breaks or handouts. They just asked to pay taxes later, after the railway started making money. But the government said no. Treasury thought it was too risky. Paul Keating, the treasurer at the time, turned it down, worried it might open the door for other projects to ask the same thing. Without those two key supports, the numbers started to slip, and not in the VFT's favor. Meanwhile, the rest of the world wasn't waiting around. Japan's Shinkansen was setting speed records. France's TGV was making money and growing fast. Even China, still catching up back then, had its eyes on high-speed rail. Back in Australia, other threats emerged. In 1990, a big change hit the skies. Airlines were deregulated. That meant more flights and cheaper tickets between Sydney and Melbourne. The VFT had promised the quickest trip, but now it was up against low-cost flights and busy airports. And then, a new problem rolled in: environmental pushback. Green groups raised their voices against the coastal route. Why? Because it would have cut through East Gippsland's eucalyptus forests, one of the last homes for the endangered long-footed potteroo. People feared it would split habitats and stop animals from moving freely. The project team listened and chose an inland route instead. It wasn't as pretty, but it was safer for nature. Still, doubts remained. Was fast rail bad for the environment? That wasn't all. People living near the planned tracks worried about noise. Would it sound like a jet engine at 350 kilometers per hour right outside their window? In some places, the team had to agree to slow trains to just 80 kilometers per hour. But here's the catch. If you keep slowing down, what happens to the whole point of fast rail? If the travel time drops too much, the whole plan might fall apart. And inside the consortium, fractures. TNT didn't want a freight service competing with its stake in Ansett Airlines. Elders IXL pulled out. Kumagai Gumi followed. By 1991, only BHP remained. The dream team that had once brought together transport, finance, construction, and industry was now gone. In August that year, the federal government officially rejected the proposed tax plan. BHP immediately suspended funding. On September 12th, the Canberra Project Office shut its doors for good. No steel laid, no tunnels bored, no stations built. And just like that, the Very Fast Train Project, Australia's most advanced high-speed rail proposal, was dead. But did Australia stop dreaming after that? Not really. Over the years, new ideas popped up. In the 1990s, there was Speed Rail, a fast train between Sydney and Canberra. Then, in 2013, the government backed a new high-speed rail study. This one imagined a full network from Melbourne to Brisbane, with trips between major cities taking less than 3 hours. It sounded great, but guess what happened? Once again, high costs, politics, and a lack of real action got in the way. The only real step since then? A possible link between Sydney and Newcastle. It's still just in the early planning stages. So, after all these years, is the dream still alive, or are we just spinning our wheels? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications.